Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for that wonderful talk. I'm so excited to hear about augmentation, the way that you talk about it. Today, I'd like to tell you that you are all cyborgs, and you don't need to be Terminator or RoboCop. You don't need to have something installed touching you 24/7, but you can be a cyborg just by wearing a pair of glasses or just using a website. And the original idea of cyborg came from a 1960 paper on space travel, and it describes an organism to which external components have been added for the purpose of adapting to new ambient environments or new spaces. And it was used to talk about somebody going into space. You can't just go into space as a human being in the same way that you can't go into the ocean and stay underwater for more than half an hour, but by adding external components to yourself, you can do so. When I started to look at the field of anthropology, especially the history of the field of anthropology, I often saw anthropologists going out to other cultures and talking about how different they were, how strange they were. Look at these interesting kinship rituals. Look at these different kinds of tools that people were using. And I thought, why don't we study ourselves? Isn't it strange that we wake up next to a piece of technology very often and it cries and we have to pick it up and soothe it back to sleep, that we might have to feed it by plugging it into the wall? Maybe we take care of the device better than we do ourselves. Maybe we take care of the device's needs better than we take care of our own needs. What does it mean to be alongside these technologies? What does it mean to have these technologies use us? And what does it mean to use these technologies for our own uses? And so I looked at the history of tools as external prosthetics and external augmentations, and also looked at the history of mental extensions of the self through writing and poetry and culture. And I looked at how much of what we're experiencing right now is very invisible, yet it's affecting us. When we talk about virtual reality, there's this idea that it needs to be three-dimensional and that we need to be in a heads-up display in order to experience this. Yet, when we look at a Facebook post or a Twitter post, we might experience a two-dimensional version of that virtual reality, but we're still getting all of those emotions. Or the idea that when you read a book, you're actually experiencing through that book all sorts of interesting experiences. It doesn't need to be three-dimensional. It doesn't need to be plugged in. And I thought about this is a great campaign where there was a printout of all of the photos on someone's hard drive, 8 years, and it looked like this. Of the idea that if you lose this thing that you've stored outside of yourself, you lose one of these hard drives, you lose your phone, you lose access to these photos, there's this feeling of loss, yet it's invisible. And yet we might hoard information like we would manually, hoarding newspapers and cats, but instead online we might hoard news digitally and digital photos of cats. It's just that we don't see it. That behavior's been more normalized to binge watch something and maybe not take a bathroom break while binge watching. We have this second self. I have these historic archive of various social media sites that I've been on for years. And after a while, I learned about this idea of the hypersigil, where you can create a secondary self, and that can work on your primary self. That it's this kind of cybernetic feedback loop in which what you post online, your extension of yourself, your digital self, can actually affect your primary self. And so there's this idea of presentation of self not in analog life, like Erving Goffman, but the presentation of self in digital life. What does that mean? How is it on each social network? Perhaps you use your LinkedIn voice on the LinkedIn social network, or you use the angry voice posting about news articles through disinformation that's been published on Twitter that angers you and you don't know why, that directly affects your amygdala and makes you just get angry at other people for no good reason. I'd like to think of this as a kind of technosocial wormhole when you make a phone call. When I was a kid, my dad talked to me about the idea of the shortest distance between 2 points. And he had point A and point B on a piece of paper, and I just drew a straight line. But then he said, no, fold the paper over. You can have this kind of wormhole type situation. So of course I went to sleep at night thinking about what would that look like in the real world. And when cell phones came out, and anywhere in the world you could just pick up a phone and call somebody else, and through this digitally reconstructed signal, have access to them, I thought this was a really intense experience of how is that going to change how we experience play and work and identity and culture and connectivity. I ended up writing my thesis on cell phones, but not just the concept of the cell phone, but what would happen when that interface went from physical buttons to a flat screen. I thought about time and space compression. This is one of my favorite maps. It's the Shrinking Map of the World by David Harvey, but it talks about the idea of the relative size of the world when you have horse-drawn carriages versus at the bottom when you have jet passenger aircraft, and how quickly you can get from one place to the other. And then if you have social media, if you have email, how quickly you can get from one place to the other as well. What is the resolution of that? Do we remember how to write a very well-focused letter to actually convey in text what we're really feeling? A lot of that we make up for with emojis, if we know how to use them very well. And then I like to think about the idea of how many different conversations and unfinished things we have going on in our laptops, in our phones, in our digital lives, conversations that haven't been commented on, maybe journal articles that we've published, or pictures that are being interacted when we're not there. And how when we open up the device, we have this experience of simultaneous time that started with all sorts of different experiences, like the first bulletin boards or instant messenger. And that when we experience this simultaneous time, all of these different things can kind of converge into a kind of architecture of panic. This was my email inbox after I spoke at TED. It was terrifying. I had to chunk it up into different categories and figure out how to respond. Can you respond? Should you respond? What does it mean to respond? And when you're just trying to be a person and be in yourself, and you kind of get this punctuation from all of these different conversations that are unfinished in all of these different social networks, this social punctuation gets in the way of experiencing more human time. And so where's the time for that self-reflection? How do you actually focus on what it is you're doing? Maybe you watch a movie, and during that movie, you remember the thing that you wanted to do, or you go on a road trip, and 30 minutes outside of town, you remember the things that you really cared about, not the little tiny emails and not the social media posts that you're angry about, but the real core of who you are and what you want to do with your life. And then you go back from that road trip, and everything happens again, and that simultaneous time collapses onto you, and you forget. I was reading this book for my thesis called Civilization and Its Discontents, one of my favorite books. In it, Freud warned of a potential future in which we would suffer from ill-fitting prosthetics. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have these prosthetics attached to you, although he had an issue with a false jaw that didn't fit particularly well. But it's the idea of having a phone for more than 3 years and it turns against you, or having a pair of shoes that don't work well with you. They work against you because they've been poorly manufactured. There hasn't been an idea of care attached, or the idea of craft attached to something that you have in your environment anymore. The quote is, "Man has, as it were, become a kind of prosthetic god. When he puts on all of his auxiliary organs, he is truly magnificent. But those organs have not grown on him, and they still give him much trouble at times." So we live in an era of very interruptive technology. It's not just battery runs out or we get a message in the middle of something else. But we need the opposite. We need a kind of calm technology. And what does a calm technology actually mean? What does it actually look like? At Xerox PARC, which is a research institution that produced a lot of really interesting thought about the future of technology in the mid-90s. There were a couple of researchers, very goofy, fun researchers named Mark Weiser and John Seeley Brown. And they wrote a series of papers about what would happen if technology were cheaper in the future. Because at this time, technology was quite expensive, connected technology. And so they wrote a paper called The Coming Age of Calm Technology, and they said, the important waves of technological change are those that fundamentally alter the place of technology in our lives. What matters is not the technology itself, but its relationship to us. And when we talk about ill-fitting prosthetics, it means the relationship between the technology and us isn't very good. When we talk about the promise of technology, we talk about the idea that it should give us more time. And instead, it seems like technology is more of a gas that expands to fit every available space in our lives. The Greeks had these two concepts of time, chronos time and kairos time. And chronos time is the kind of factory time where you need to produce something on time. You have a meeting from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. with a certain agenda to get something done. It's very mechanical time. And kairos time is the opposite. It's the kind of time of watching a sunset or falling in love for the first time or watching a baby's first steps, or it's the kind of time that you remember on your deathbed. It's truly human. It is what it is like to see a flower bloom. And yet, technology was supposed to promise us this kairos time, this more human time. And yet, there's a new paper that's come out that talks about just how much of our time isn't even spent using technology, but configuring the technology so that we can use it. What happened? We were promised kairos time, so how do we get our time back? So how do we actually design a calm technology? So the first principle of calm technology is that technology shouldn't be requiring all of our attention, just some of it, and only when necessary. And this came out of the original paper from 1995 about how you could build calm technology, that in the future, instead of many people sharing one big mainframe computer, many devices would share each of us. And at that point in time, technology wouldn't be scarce, our attention will be scarce. And how that technology worked with or against our attention would make or break our technology. A light switch is an interesting affordance because you don't have to think about a light switch. It's just there when you need it, not when you don't. It doesn't mean it's invisible. It just means that it's there. Anybody can use a light switch. Maybe a 5-year-old has to get on top of a chair to reach the light switch, but it can be used. And the special thing about a light switch is that behind the scenes, there is electricity that can kill you. And yet, it's been handled in a way that there are standards around that electricity. Right now, we're designing socially dangerous technology, and we aren't having electrical certifications, and we don't even have buttons that are standardized that we can press. This can be considered a pass-through technology. The one thing I love about Windows is that they're literally a pass-through technology. When they work well, you just look through them. You don't notice the window, you notice the view. You don't notice the window, you notice what time of day it is. Technology should inform and calm you down, or inform you in a calm way, and should empower your peripheral attention. In a car, you have the ability to press the pedal. On an old sewing machine, you could press a pedal. Most of our new technologies don't even have that experience of being able to push. Actually, the first mouse had a foot pedal, so you could scroll down the page with it. But the whole point of the car is that you're focusing your primary attention on the road. Every single thing in that car is about secondary and tertiary attention, glanceability from the rearview window or the rearview mirror so that you can actually figure out how to go forward. It's not doing a ton of stuff for you, except all of these little systems inside are making sure that that car keeps running, but you're doing the steering. And we allow people to drive very dangerous machines on the road and trust them. But the other thing is that it takes a long time to learn how to drive. It's a cultural, social experience that gives us certain benefits. There's an incentive to do it. Compare that with an app that people get frustrated with that they couldn't learn to use in 20 minutes. If it takes a long time to learn how to use a pass-through technology like a pencil, and yet you can draw and write for the rest of your life, that's a pretty good piece of technology. It doesn't need to be perfect looking. It doesn't need to be perfect in terms of being able to be used immediately. It just has to be usable very nicely once you've learned how to use it, like a bicycle. My old co-founder and I made this weather status lighting. It would just change color based on what the weather would be for the day. So there would be an API that would query the weather, and then it would change the light bulb to the color of the weather. And then if you wanted, you could look at the iPad on the wall for the higher resolution weather report. So low resolution infosynesthesia and higher resolution information on the wall. But you could walk into the kitchen in the morning, not your bedroom, the kitchen, and you would feel the weather, the future of the weather for that day. And this was really interesting, bringing that information from the future into the present, or at least a feeling of it. And this idea of ambient awareness is an augmented reality. It's just you don't need to hook up to a computer. You don't need a disembodied female voice usually to tell you what the weather's going to be. It's non-intrusive. You have the option to access more information if you want. This is another example of taking information and changing it into another sense. This is just a color coding for water. So if you turned on a shower, you might have a different color of purple that you like better than someone else's favorite color of purple for a mix of hot and cold. This is also used in industrial applications. You color a pipe with whatever color the water is in the pipe, and people have an idea of safety around it. Simple visual indicators that can allow people to see what's formally invisible so that they don't have to touch and find out. Technology should amplify the best of what technology can do and the best of what humanity can do. Very often we build it the wrong way and then we make ourselves automated. Oftentimes when you're on a phone and you just press the operator button because you want to speak to a real-life person, you're the one that's repeating yourself into the Alexa because it doesn't understand you. Every time we make machines that act like humans, we end up ourselves becoming more like machines to interact with them. I like Google because it's not trying to give you the exact result. It's giving you a set of choices, but it's doing it behind the scenes very, very quickly and becoming like a pass-through. Now Google has become difficult in terms of the results that it actually provides you with, because if you look at a recipe online, it's like 20 personal stories and then maybe an ingredient list, 10 ads, and then maybe you get the recipe, which is why a lot of people are just saying, hey, GPT, give me this recipe, and there's no ads associated with it. Even if it's inaccurate, it's a better experience because it's more of a pass-through. And this idea of humans alongside technology, we think of the idea of technology will take over, but the thing is that that's already happened during the Industrial Revolution. We now work for the technology. But how do we work better alongside of the technology? This is an exoskeleton suit in Japan. This guy had to leave the workforce because he had a slipped disc, and he wanted to be able to lift boxes and not worry about it and go back to work. And so he got this exoskeleton suit. Check out the harmonious colors. It doesn't look terrifying. It's not Terminator style. It has an easily accessible battery. Someone else can help you put it on. And now you can work alongside your coworkers, and the technology is working alongside you. When we look at the history of alongside technology in many places, especially Japan, you have the idea of technology working alongside a village. I love just thinking about before electricity, how many things were water-powered, and how this entire ceramics village, the grinding of the fine powder to produce the pottery is done by a river and these very giant pieces of wood. This concept in Japan of omotenashi is really interesting to me because it's the idea of a service culture, the idea in a tea house of being prepared for someone ahead of their needs. When you translate this into the more automated world, you have the idea that you know that technology will break down, and when it does, there's a backup. And I love this example because this guy is flummoxed, right? He's, wow, I was having trouble getting my ticket, but someone knew, and they were there to help me. So if we assume that things will fail, and we make the experience of failure delightful, we're doing the best of humans and the best of machines, provided we pay the people who back up what you're doing very well so that they can also be happy in their jobs and happy to help. Technology can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. How many times have you seen some sort of science fiction film where everything is constantly talking? I like the Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner because when it's done, it goes dun 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 dun, and when it's stuck, it goes dun dun. It's a human universal almost of the positive and the negative, and it's not trying to do everything for you. It actually needs your help. And when technology needs your help, like a Tamagotchi, like a pocket pet, you have to care for it. You're more bonded to it. And so in helping out this thing that isn't very good at cleaning corners, you actually get more bonded to the device. And cats like to ride around on it in YouTube videos. In traditional engineering, you're taught how to have a backup. You're taught about redundancy. You're taught about ethics. You're taught about how to make things work for everyone. And when an escalator fails, it turns into stairs. There's a backup mode. When an elevator fails, good luck. And the right amount of tech is the minimum to solve the problem. I really like these pieces of technology because they're simple light indicators or they're simple icons that almost everyone can understand. So, in conclusion, if good design allows people to accomplish their goals in the least amount of moves, then calm technology does the same thing, but ideally with the least amount of mental cost. A person's primary task shouldn't be computing unless it's your choice, but being human. I archive the principles because Mark Weiser, co-founder of Calm Technology, passed away at age 46 before he could write a book on it. And I've archived his work on calmtech.com. I encourage you to check it out. It's an easy, fun site. It'll be there for a long time, hopefully. Thank you so much.